Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome you to a special event sponsored by the Kelly Day Endowment on the status of women and human rights in the Middle East. The topic of our speaker's presentation, the politics of hunger, is both timely and important. The United Nations World Food Program estimates that there are 925 million undernourished people in the world. Rising food prices are affecting not just them, but many others of modest income. Food security remains one of the most pressing issues confronting us as a global community, and our distinguished speaker is dedicated to addressing it. She's a person of many facets, a humanitarian, a former Olympic athlete, and a member of the International Olympic Committee. She's also a United Nations Messenger of Peace, President of the International Equestrian Foundation, and, if you allow me, the only Jordanian woman who holds a license to drive heavy trucks to transport her horses. Our speaker is the daughter of His Majesty the late King Hussein bin Talal of Jordan and the wife of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and ruler of Dubai. She is an eminent humanitarian in her own right. In memory of her late mother, Queen Aliyah of Jordan, our speaker founded Taqiyat Ali in 2003, the first food aid NGO in the Arab world, and she became chair of its board of directors. She was also the first Arab and first woman to serve as World Food Program Goodwill Ambassador from 2005 to 2007. In that role, she traveled to Malawi, Ethiopia, and Syria to witness firsthand the impact of the food crises in those countries. She continues in her efforts to bring attention to food shortages and humanitarian crises in places as varied as Kenya, Haiti, and Cambodia. On a personal note, I want to say that while I was in government, I was very privileged to work extraordinarily closely with her father, King Hussein. He was not only my friend, but he was a good friend as well of the United States of America. Today, his daughter comes to the Institute at a time of historic change in the Middle East. It is far too early, of course, for any of us to say exactly how these events will ultimately unfold. But one thing is very certain. The Middle East, more than ever, will be in need of individuals committed to the cause of human development in all of its forms. And we are honored that one such individual is with us this evening, and that her efforts are indeed making a difference. So please join me in welcoming warmly Her Royal Highness Prince Haya bint Al Hussein. Your Royal Highness.
Secretary Baker, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's an honor for me to speak at the Baker Institute. This visit is particularly special to me because of the connection with Secretary Baker. Mr. Secretary, I know you spent a good deal of time with my late father, His Majesty King Hussein, in your mutual quest to bring a lasting peace to our region. I remember very well how highly he respected you as a diplomat, and just as the rest of the world does, for your service as U.S. Secretary of State. I also remember how he looked upon you as his partner in the quest for peace in the Middle East. Some people feel, unfortunately, that the dream is still unattainable. I disagree. The foundation that you, my father, and other statesmen like you put in place years ago is still there. What we need now are people who will build on that foundation, people who will heed the founding vision of this institute and put ideas into action, people who are willing to cooperate with each other and to compromise keep promises for the greater good. Peace is always a living process that needs to be maintained and nurtured once the foundation has been laid. And we still need America's help and leadership to make it work. We need America's help and leadership as well on the problem of hunger, which I'm here to speak to you about this evening. Before I do, I have to tell you how pleased I am to make my first visit to Texas. I have long had a fascination for your state for a couple of reasons. One goes back to a childhood desire that I can't really explain, but for some reason, I've always wanted to have an armadillo as a pet. Seriously. Although I've never even seen one, I know you have plenty here in Texas, and I've been reliably advised that I'm most likely to see one flattened on the roadway. It's not really what I had in mind, but I'm still on the lookout. The other reason for my fascination with Texas is more of substance and involves a cherished memory of my late father. People around the world associate the word Houston with the American space program, but I feel a special connection in that regard. I was sitting on the floor next to my father's desk in 1983 when he spoke by ham radio with one of your astronauts, Owen Garriott, on the Space Shuttle Columbia. King Hussein was an avid ham radio enthusiast, as was Garriott. I can still clearly remember the excitement I felt as we waited to make contact with the space shuttle as it flew over the Red Sea in Jordan. I also remember the sparkle of excitement in my father's eyes as he listened to Mr. Garriott explain that the ham radio in his spacecraft was built by an amateur ham radio club here in the Houston area. You can still hear their conversation on the internet today. As Houstonians, you know well as anyone what mankind can do with American leadership. It has become a cliché to say, if we can put a man on the moon, why can't we? This city and this state exemplify the can-do attitude of this country. The United States is the most powerful nation on earth. Its the greatest power isn't represented by weaponry. It's represented by values. We've seen American values in action many times around the world. Where you lead, the world follows. Now more than ever, the world needs you to put American values into action in the fight against hunger. It is an issue that threatens our security, our economic well-being, and the lives of our fellow human beings, and solving it is a prerequisite for peace. The need to deal with hunger should be obvious, and yet we are not making much progress. In the year 2000, leaders from nearly every country on earth, including the United States, made a promise, the biggest development commitment in the history of mankind. In adopting the UN's Millennium Development Goals, world leaders pledged to achieve a set of specific objectives by 2015. The goals addressed 8 issue areas, including universal primary education, gender equality, child mortality, maternal health, HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases, environmental sustainability, and a global partnership for development. The first Millennium Development Goal, and the one I'm most passionate about, addresses hunger and poverty. Our goal is to reduce by half the proportion of people suffering from hunger as measured from 1990 to 2015. This is not going well. There are about 830 million people, hungry people, worldwide when UN delegates adopted the UN Millennium Development Goals, more than a decade ago. There are now more than 1 billion. Few people realize that hunger and malnutrition remain the biggest single threat to public health worldwide. They claim more lives than heart disease, cancer, or AIDS. Hunger also causes significant economic damage. Anemia impairs the mental development of 40 to 60% of children in developing countries, affecting roughly 2 billion people worldwide. Eradicating it would, according to the World Health Organization, improve national productivity levels by up to 20%. I could tell you heart-wrenching stories of starvation, like the tiny infant in Malawi whose lifeless body was taken away in a small black plastic bag moments after I held her hand. That was the kind of bag that you would use to take out the trash. But that bag contained a lost treasure, an unfulfilled potential, a human life with its future denied. But there's another side of hunger that's harder to see, the degradation and loss of human dignity that the cycle of poverty and hunger forces on its victims before it extracts the ultimate price. People who cannot meet the basic needs of their families lose their human dignity, and without human dignity, there can be no peace. My father put it this way: we need a sense of security in our private and national lives. We need hope for our children. We need opportunities for our own development and faith in the moral conscience of the world and in our own destiny. And he was right. I think one of the most haunting sights I have ever seen is what happens when food is being distributed and quantities are short, or demand is too great. I've seen the mood change suddenly from the beaten, glassy eyes of the hungry as they wait docilely for food to the seething, menacing look of panicked and desperate people. People will literally kill to feed their children and their families. To witness that transformation in a fellow human being is truly frightening. But what is equally disturbing to see is the transformation that occurs when the last scrap of food is gone. The faces that were contorted in fury become masks of shame. To look at that and to know that those people are experiencing a sense of helplessness at the loss of their own dignity is horrific. That's what the lack of food does to people, and it occurs around the world every single day. Recent events have highlighted the complicated connections between food, poverty, and politics. One of the driving forces as the Arab youth took the streets from the Maghreb to the Arabian Gulf was actually the price of food. It is telling that one of the most common slogans in Cairo's Tahrir Square was bread, freedom, social justice, and in that order. A recent public opinion survey in Egypt, funded by the US government, found that less than 20% of Egyptians who participated in the protests were motivated by concerns about a lack of democracy. Nearly 2/3 said they took to the streets because of frustration over poor living conditions and unemployment. More than 40% of all poll respondents selected this statement to describe their life. I have trouble feeding myself and my family and buying even the essential things for survival. To be sure, other factors contributed to the unrest. We can debate about how much of the turmoil of the Arab Spring is linked to economics, religion, or politics, but this much is clear. Food is the most basic human need. When it's not met, people take action. And by the way, this issue is directly related to the important goals of the Baker Institute's Kelly Day Endowment on the status of women and human rights in the Middle East. We all know that women around the world, whether they live in developing nations or prosperous nations, are the ones who literally put food on the table. They bear the burden of making do with what they have, no matter how little. It's their job to stretch whatever money is available as far as it will go. And when there's not enough money or food to meet basic needs, women and children are almost always the first victims of poverty and hunger. For people engaged in the daily struggle for survival, discussions about democracy, the empowerment of women, and other issues that take center stage in developing nations are secondary to fending off hunger. We have to solve that problem first. The recent events in the Middle East have been described as a wake-up call for the region. but they should be a wake-up call for the world. The Middle East is well fed when set against the daily suffering in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. In the rural villages of Cambodia I visited in February, as much as 70% of household income is spent on food, compared to around 10% here in the US. Imagine life if an average Texan had to spend $25,000 a year just on food. We saw more than 60 food riots from 2007 to 2009 alone, from Haiti to Indonesia. Last month, rising food prices were an important factor behind protests that led to violence in the Republic of Georgia. We can expect more food-related instability. Figures compiled by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization show that global food prices have hit a record high. The Financial Times recently reported that global consumer surveys were showing the price of food and its availability as the most reported concern of families, even more than the precarious state of the world economy. The implications of these disturbing trends go far beyond individual countries or even specific regions that suffer from food imbalances. Extremist groups all over the world feast on hunger. Some use free meals as a magnet to attract and corrupt a captive audience of young people. A hungry child is easy to mold, for good or for ill. Others simply exploit the desperation and hunger fostered by offering an illusory vision of a better future built on a twisted worldview. In the hands of extremists, hunger can be a weapon far more effective than a roadside bomb. So what do we do about this? There are some specific policy prescriptions that deserve serious consideration in world capitals. Redesigning or dismantling agricultural subsidies would remove trade distortions and could make it easier for poor countries to produce and compete. These subsidies are enormous and expensive. Each year, the world's donors provide a few $billion in food aid, while they spend more than that in a week on subsidies that hurt poor farmers in the developing world. We should invest more in agriculture and increasing food output worldwide. There is truth in the proverb, give a man a fish and you'll feed him for a day. Teach him to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime. But, unfortunately, we've neglected the cycle of poverty and hunger for so long, we're now obliged to do both. We have to feed a man to give him the strength to be able to feed himself. Remember the Green Revolution that raised food productivity so dramatically in South Asia? We need more of that type of investment. We must also make sure that our political leaders keep their promises. Too many commitments are made, but not kept. For example, at the G8 summit in Italy in 2009, the developed nations pledged to collectively invest $22 billion in agricultural development and food aid. Less than $5 billion has actually materialized. The United States is among those that have fallen short, and the future US contributions are at risk because of political disagreements. I understand the fiscal constraints that the United States and other developed countries face. We certainly felt the global recession in the UAE, but we have met the UN target of devoting at least 1% of our GNP to foreign aid. My husband, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, often asks, how can countries around the world spend more than $1 trillion for armaments as we fight over land, ideology, and religion, and let 300 million children starve? The desire of the people of the Arabian Peninsula for a better life led to the creation of the United Arab Emirates in 1971. Colonial rule came to an end in a bloodless struggle motivated by a dream shared by His Highness Sheikh Zayed, the late president, and His Highness Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum. At the time, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid was the youngest Minister of Defense in the world. He was passionate about meeting the needs of people, and he helped his father and the late Sheikh Zayed build the UAE. They were driven to ensure that their people had access to food, clean drinking water, education, healthcare, safety, and opportunity in that order. Now, in the modern UAE, that remains the priority under the leadership of His Highness Sheikh Khalifa, to give people the opportunity to achieve their full promise as human beings. Many people are skeptical about the idea of cooperation in the Arab world, but the United Arab Emirates shows what can be accomplished. 7 Emirates, joined by a federal government in defense, internal and external policy, and united in an absolute commitment to give their citizens a better life. That is what it takes to deal with any problem, an unbending commitment to act. More than anything, we need to act against hunger. It has to become a priority. We need that sense of outrage. The international community is rightfully outraged when a leader uses weapons against his own people. But where is the outrage when a leader lets his people starve? That is where you come in. As people of intellect, education, and huge influence, you can help set the priorities of this great nation. We have seen what America can do when it sets its mind to it. During World War I, American food relief saved millions of Europeans from starvation. After World War II, the Marshall Plan rebuilt a devastated Europe and turned bitter enemies into reliable allies and economic partners. In the 1960s, Food for Peace saved millions from starvation in India. Secretary of State George Marshall, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for the Marshall Plan, outlined the rationale for it in his speech at Harvard. His words in 1947 ring true today. "It is logical," he said, "that the United States should do whatever it is able to do to assist in the return of normal economic health in the world, without which there can be no political stability and no assured peace. Our policy is directed not against any country or doctrine, but against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos." I saw American values in action after the deadly earthquake in Haiti last year, when I traveled to Port-au-Prince with a plane load of relief supplies from the International Humanitarian City in Dubai. Amid all the chaos, 2 things were holding Haiti together at that point: the US military and the United Nations. American might and international cooperation can be a powerful force for good. The American soldiers were backed by UN peacekeepers from countries all around the world, including a large contingent from Jordan. Let me be clear. I'm not asking for a massive bailout from Uncle Sam. This has to be a global commitment and a global effort, but America's special place in the world gives it a unique ability to make a real difference in the lives of people around the world. All it takes is a commitment. I know that many people in the developed world are not even aware of the Millennium Development Goals. But I can tell you this: the people whose lives depend on it, the people whose lives depend on whether we keep this commitment or not, know about it. That point became clear to me during a visit to the Kibera slum in Nairobi. I met 2 young children, a boy and a girl, who talked about the Millennium Development Goals in detail. They knew about the goals because they are their best hope, perhaps their only hope, for their future. The MDGs are a promise the world has made to them, and so many others like them. They are the hopes and dreams of the poor and neglected. They are anxiously waiting to see if we will fulfill our promise or abandon them. The moment that your governments committed to the MDGs was the moment we lost the ability to abandon those people. Failure to meet their expectations will only result in the same frightening behavior I've seen when food distribution goes wrong, and that's not the world we should leave our children. I conclude with this plea. No matter how hard things may be today, please use your influence to encourage policies that support the Millennium Development Goals. Help end the scourge of hunger and pain and the conflict it creates. We can make a difference if we put ideas into action, and we can build on the foundation we have inherited from Secretary Baker and others like him, and leave our children a world we can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. We have many questions, as usual, but but don't worry, we don't have that much time. First, I did note that you quoted from your husband, Sheikh Mohammed Al Maktoum's speech, which is a very important speech he gave several years ago on the deficits in the Arab world and the stark comparison between the investments in militarization and defense and the lack of investment in education, infrastructure, jobs, the economy, etc. And that has come to the fore today in what we're seeing in the broader Middle East, as you indicated in your excellent remarks. Food, obviously, as you have underlined and you've dedicated your life now to this cause, is a fundamental factor. We have several questions that are asking, commending you for using your position for this campaign to alleviate hunger in the world, but asking what can an ordinary citizen do to engage his or herself in this campaign?
Well, first of all, let me say what an honor it is for me to be here today, and for me to receive such wonderful compliments from you, sir, on my efforts. And you say that I've used my position in order to help this campaign, but in all honesty, when I started and even now, I don't feel any different from any one of you. I feel helpless often, and I ask myself every day, what can I do to help in a problem that seems so huge? But in actual fact, it's not. It really is, as I tried to mention, it truly is solvable. I do believe we can start by looking at the Millennium Development Goals. There are many programs out there, that some of which we mentioned earlier, the Millennium microfinancing projects and others like them, and think tanks like this one have already done excellent work in improving and refining those models, and really having support and awareness for things that really do make a practical difference to people's lives is where it starts. And it really is one practical step after another that will solve the problem. But I do think that what every single individual can do is start to put pressure on their governments. As I said, we have made a commitment which we need to keep by 2015. And I do very much fear that the unrest we've seen around the world will increase if we don't meet that 2015 deadline. I think that what we can do on an individual level is to remind our governments that that's what they owe us and our children.
Excellent. One question is, are there any particular strategies in place to address increased malnutrition as a function of crop shortages due to climate change? In other words, this issue may also be a concomitant of forces we have no control over.
I think there are definitely already a variety of different programs that are in place, whether you look at organizations like AGRA and whether you look at organizations like the World Food Programme. I do think there's many different NGOs that have a variety of different programs. What programs are in place as a result of the factors that create hunger? Agriculture is a very large, largely researched area of the food industry, definitely, and of eradicating hunger. That's a very, very long discussion for someone much more technically able than myself. But yes, there are many programs in place and many solutions to be found. It's just that this issue really isn't a priority for most people and most governments.
Exactly. Interesting question. Have you collaborated with the economists who happen to be here and spoke here, Amartya Sen, on poverty and hunger? Do you consult economists? This must come from an economist in the audience.
Yes, definitely. Economists are consulted, and a lot of the plans that have been laid. I think that the United Nations has looked at, and the creation of the Millennium Development Goals were based on economic feasibility. So that's definite. But I personally, yes, I do consult with economists. I very much admire economists, and I'm sure I'll look forward to consulting more in the future.
You've just made our faculty very happy.
I felt the pressure. I consult other people as well, but economists have studied economics, so.
What can we do to make sure that food that is donated to the needy is really distributed to them and not going elsewhere? This brings up the whole question of corruption at various institutions and in various countries and organizations. Have you been able to address this? It's a huge issue.
Actually, the experience that we've had in Tkiya Tumaili, the hunger NGO that Secretary Baker very kindly mentioned, is the fact that, one of our most, continuing and strenuous efforts is completely dedicated to making sure that Kiyat is completely apolitical in every sense, that food really is delivered to people who deserve it, and it's not used as a tool in any way to guide them one way or the other in the future. And I think that that is a premise. There's always worries and there's always rumors in any area of the humanitarian industry and efforts made for aid, whether it has been delivered to the right people at the right time, in the right quantities, for the right reasons, whether there's corruption or not. And to a large extent, those rumors are used as a reason not to deliver help where it's needed. And I really do believe in the issue of hunger, that yes, we always do have to make sure that it is going to the right people, but we have also got to make sure that we're giving as much as is needed at the same time, and we're not using that excuse to fall short. And I really do believe that hunger is really, one of the causes of social unrest, it's threatening our security, it's really changing the lives of young people around the world. And we will create more of the wrong hands for food to go to in the future if we don't make sure that we help now. So we will be creating more of the people that we want to avoid in the future if we don't help now.
You mentioned earlier that food is used obviously as a political tool. Just referred to that again, and we've seen the success, at least in the Middle East context, of organizations such as Hezbollah and other organizations that very cleverly, very smartly have distributed food to the poor and other social services in order to gain their adherence to their organization, but doing it in a very soft power way. But it has proven to be quite effective. So I'm just commenting on how important food is in a political dimension, especially what we've been seeing in the Middle East recently. What regions exhibit the greatest need for proper nutrition in the world?
Mr. Ambassador, just sorry to go back to your last point,
yes.
But I think the feeling or the sadness that people like myself feel is the fact that for some of us in the industry and for some of us who are looking at the hungry, we do hear comments like that every day. But when you see the people who are receiving food, who have no hope of getting it from anywhere else, you start not to care where it comes from.
Exactly.
And I think that that's what we all need to make sure stops. And the more that we help people in need and and bring an end to world hunger. And it really does sound impossible. I mean, I laugh sometimes when I think, I'll work today on ending world hunger. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it really is. If you take country model by country model individually, it really is doable. It really needs the commitment.
And as your husband stated in that speech, the revitalization of the economies, so that you're producing, that the economies are functional in providing jobs and providing an agricultural sector that provides food for the people and the basic services. This is the key challenge.
Exactly.
Again, this is a broad question. Which regions exhibit the greatest need for proper nutrition? I don't know if there's an answer to that or not.
Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia. The Middle East. Unfortunately, it's worldwide now, all over the world. As I said, we've witnessed food riots from all the way to as far as Indonesia. I mean, it really is a global problem.
What is the role of governments in countries that obtain food aid? How could the distribution of aid be audited? How do developing nations act in this regard? Are there any examples in your experience in dealing with this issue of countries who have best succeeded in fighting hunger? Are there a couple of examples out there that?
Unfortunately, no. I don't have examples of countries who've succeeded in fighting hunger, apart from the examples that I used in my speech of the way that America has done it in history. Countries who've helped themselves are now few and far between in the world. We're working in Jordan on a project now to try and do that. I felt that it's one thing to sit and go around the world and advocate for other people to end hunger, and actually I should be looking at it in my own country. And we actually, I hesitate to go into the detail now because we're not completely on solid ground and we have more economists to consult. But we do feel that it is doable by 2014, and that it is actually very feasible.
And what concomitant, is there any bad or worst examples that you can cite that should be avoided in terms of dealing with hunger and countries that get aid and use them in a very bad way? Would that be sub-Saharan Africa, for example, in terms of?
No, I mean, daily in the industry we do, you hear ongoing debate about probably projects that work, projects that don't. There's different discussions about whether certain initiatives are corrupt. The same kind of discussions that you hear in all sectors of life, really, in politics, in different governments. But the thing is, in the humanitarian industry, these kind of discussions are being used as a way to escape the ultimate responsibility that we have. And I think that that's the main issue. Again, institutes like this one, governments like your own, forcing your colleagues to look at this as a serious issue that deserves serious thought now, will really give it the impetus and probably come up with far better ideas than the ones we have. But even if we don't come up with better ideas and we just completely support and back the promises that we've already made, it would be a huge step. The problem is it's not a priority. It's not a priority.
This is really one of your major messages, that it has to be made a priority, and it is not a priority.
I think that's it is one of the main messages, and I don't mean to be skirting your questions, but I honestly don't see the point in naming and shaming countries or individuals or certain projects for what's been a failure and heralding others as an individual success. I do think that there are really a lot of fantastic organizations out there. The United Nations World Food Programme, Kofi Annan's AGRA, Bill Gates's. I mean, all of those efforts have huge potential to solve the problem. More like them, but more investment in those ideas and more commitment to the actual issue itself is what will make the difference. And what I was trying to say in the speech is that there is so much philosophical discussion going on around the world, and unfortunately it stayed at the discussion level. And what I was so thrilled to read when I knew I was being given the invitation to come, Mr. Secretary, to this institute, was that one of your core beliefs is about putting ideas into action.
Exactly.
And I really do think that the time for ideas on an issue like hunger is over, because the clock is ticking, and we already have some very serious warning signs that the world that we're living in and the world that we're definitely giving our children is one that's very, very unstable, and it's something so basic as hunger that it really I can't understand why we're not doing more about it.
Do you think the current situation, this is the last question, do you think that the current political situation in the Middle East, which is so historic and such a turning point, that this will hinder the effort to provide food to the needy and the whole politics of hunger and alleviating hunger?
I believe that the people who deliver food to the Middle East we have now will be the rulers in the Middle East tomorrow, whoever they are.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, thank you very much, Your Royal Highness. You realize you put me in a very difficult position, because I'm going to get about 100 research proposals from the faculty now on how to alleviate hunger, and I'm going to have to deal with all that. But we are truly honored to have you here and to hear your thoughts, and really congratulate you on the effort you're making on such a worthy cause, and to help put it in the priority of the world. Thank you very much.